Black tech genius Amazes executive board. She solves the crisis in minutes. The boardroom fell silent as the lights dimmed. 20 executives stared at the emergency alert flashing across the main screen. Critical system failure, 82% of customer data COMPROMICD. The company had 45 minutes until the breach would become public. "We're looking at a complete collapse," CEO Richard Harmon said, his voice tight with controlled panic. "Our stock will plummet." Class action lawsuits, regulatory fines. This is extinction level. Executive faces paled in the blue glow of their tablets. The chief technology officer was already making calls to their crisis management team, a group that would arrive too late. In the corner of the room, Amara Collins sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap. She'd been invited to this emergency meeting only because she happened to be in the building updating security protocols on another system. As a mid-level cybersecurity specialist, she wasn't supposed to speak unless directly addressed. Amara glanced at her tablet, fingers twitching slightly. She knew exactly what was happening and how to fix it. She'd warned about this vulnerability 6 months ago, but her report had been buried. Now she faced a moral dilemma: speak up and risk her career by violating corporate hierarchy, or remain silent and watch a preventable disaster unfold. The CTO's voice cut through the panic. "We need to shut down all systems immediately. It's our only option." "That would trigger immediate disclosure requirements," the legal counsel objected. "We'd be announcing our failure to the world." Amara took a deep breath and stood up. 20 pairs of eyes turned toward her. "I know how to fix this," she said quietly, "but we have 38 minutes, not 45. 6 months earlier, Amara Collins walked through the polished glass doors of Vertex Technologies with a sense of possibility. After years of working at smaller firms, this was her big break, a senior cybersecurity position at one of the country's fastest-growing tech companies. "Welcome to Vertex," said Marcus Williams, her new team leader, extending his hand. Tall with graying temples and an easy smile, Marcus had a reputation for building diverse teams. "The security division is this way." As they walked, Marcus pointed out various departments. "That's executive row," he said, nodding toward a corridor of spacious offices with floor-to-ceiling windows. "Where the big decisions happen, though between us, most of the real work happens down here." Amara smiled. "I noticed Vertex has fewer women in leadership than the industry average. Any particular reason?" Marcus raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by her directness. "That's changing, slowly. Richard, our CEO, he's old school but not immovable." He paused. "But fair warning, Amara. People here expect you to prove yourself before you get a voice at the table." "I'm used to that," she replied. "Been proving myself since I was the only black girl in AP Computer Science." Marcus introduced her to the security team, 12 people, only 3 women, and Amara was the only person of color. Still, they seemed competent and welcoming enough. "This is Devin," Marcus said, introducing a lanky young man with rumpled clothes and nervous energy. "Our resident genius. Graduated MIT at 19. Devin barely looked up from his screen. "Hey, and this is Christine," Marcus continued, gesturing toward a middle-aged woman with a precise bob and immaculate blazer. "Been with us since the beginning, knows our systems better than anyone." Christine offered a thin smile. "Welcome aboard. I hope Marcus has explained our protocols. We're very process-oriented here." "He did," Amara said, "but I also believe in finding hidden vulnerabilities. Sometimes the biggest threats aren't where you're looking." Christine's smile tightened. "We have established penetration testing schedules. You'll get the documentation this afternoon." Amara's first few weeks were a blur of learning systems, procedures, and office politics. Vertex's security infrastructure was sophisticated but conventional, nothing surprising for a company with billions in venture capital. During her 3rd week, she began noticing anomalies in the authentication logs, nothing alarming, just unusual patterns that triggered her instincts. She spent evenings analyzing the data, creating visualization maps of user behavior. "You're here late," Marcus said, stopping by her desk one evening. "Finding anything interesting?" Amara hesitated. "Maybe. There's unusual traffic around the customer database integration points. It could be nothing but." "But your instincts say otherwise," Marcus finished. She nodded. "I'd like to run some deeper scans outside the regular schedule." Marcus considered this. "Submit a formal request. I'll back you, but Christine will push back. She doesn't like deviations." The next morning, Christine was waiting at Amara's desk. "I understand you want to run unauthorized scans on our production system." "Not unauthorized. I submitted the request forms," Amara replied calmly. "I found patterns suggesting nothing," Christine interrupted. "You've been here less than a month. These patterns appear periodically. They're artifacts from our backup system." I've checked that. The timing doesn't align with scheduled backups. Christine's expression hardened. The request is denied. Follow the established protocols, Amara. That's how we maintain security here. Later, Marcus stopped by. Sorry about Christine. She's protective of the system she built. This isn't about ego, Amara said. Those patterns concern me. I think there's a vulnerability in how the customer database connects to the third-party verification service. Marcus sighed. Document everything. Build your case. I'll try to get you time with the senior team next month. But the next month meeting never happened. Week after week, urgent projects took precedence. Amara documented her concerns in detailed reports that disappeared into the system. Devon, the young MIT graduate, became her unexpected ally. I looked at your analysis, he said one day, dropping into the chair beside her desk. You're right about the authentication anomalies. It's not the backup system. Thank you, Amara said, genuinely surprised. Any thoughts on the cause? The API connecting our customer verification service wasn't properly updated when we migrated to the new database structure, Devon said. It's creating microsecond authentication gaps. Probably nothing, but a determined attacker could exploit it, Amara finished. Exactly what I've been saying, Devon shrugged. Yeah, well, good luck getting anyone to listen. Last year I found a backdoor in the accounting software. Took 3 months to get a meeting, and by then they'd already committed to the quarterly update cycle. Corporate inertia. Amara wasn't deterred. She refined her analysis, creating a proof-of-concept demonstration that showed how the vulnerability could be exploited. She scheduled meetings with increasingly senior managers, most of which were canceled at the last minute. 4 months into her time at Vertex, she finally secured 15 minutes with Edward Chen, the chief technology officer. He was polite but distracted, checking his phone throughout her presentation. So you're saying there's a theoretical vulnerability in our customer database, he summarized when she finished. Not theoretical. I've demonstrated how it could be exploited under specific circumstances, he finished. I appreciate your diligence, Amara. I'll have Christine's team review this in the next security assessment cycle. That's 3 months away, Amara pointed out. This vulnerability exists now. Edward gave her a patronizing smile. Vertex processes over 2 million customer transactions daily. We can't disrupt operations for every potential security concern. Follow the proper channels. Amara left the meeting frustrated but not defeated. She updated her documentation and submitted formal security alerts through the company's system. Each received the same response, scheduled for review in the next assessment cycle. You need to let this go, Christine told her after a team meeting. You're developing a reputation as difficult. Difficult, Amara repeated. Inflexible, not a team player. Christine lowered her voice. Some people are saying you're trying to make a name for yourself at the expense of those who built these systems. This isn't about me, Amara insisted. It's about a genuine security risk. Christine's expression softened slightly. Look, I'm trying to help you. Vertex is a great company, but you need to understand how things work here. Change happens incrementally through proper channels, even when those channels are too slow to address real threats. That's how large organizations function, Christine said. You can either adapt or... The unspoken alternative hung in the air between them. 2 weeks later, Marcus called Amara into his office. I've got good news and complicated news. Start with the good, Amara said. The executive team has approved an accelerated security review based partly on your reports, not immediate but within the next 4 weeks instead of 3 months. That's something, Amara acknowledged. And the complicated news? Marcus looked uncomfortable. They want to bring in an external security consultant to lead it, someone with more experience at this scale. Amara felt a familiar disappointment settle in her chest. They're sidelining me. They're bringing in Davenport security industry leaders. I know who they are, Amara said. Mostly white men who give keynotes at conferences and charge $500 an hour to tell companies what their own employees have already told them. Marcus winced. That's not entirely fair, isn't it? I identified a specific vulnerability, demonstrated how it could be exploited, and provided a detailed remediation plan. But instead of listening to me, they're paying outside consultants to come in and... She stopped, realizing her voice had risen. This wasn't Marcus's fault. I'm sorry, she said more calmly. I appreciate you pushing for the accelerated review. For what it's worth, I think you're right, Marcus said, both about the vulnerability and, he hesitated, other things. Amara nodded, grateful for the acknowledgement but aware it changed nothing. As she turned to leave, Marcus added, the consultants will be here next Monday. I've made sure you're included in all the meetings. The Davenport team arrived the following week, 3 consultants in expensive suits with impressive resumes and practiced presentations. Amara sat through meetings where they outlined standard security protocols, most of which Vertex already followed. On the third day, she finally had an opportunity to speak directly with James Davenport himself, the firm's founder. "I've reviewed your reports," he said as they stood near the coffee station. "Thorough work." "Thank you," Amara replied. "Have you looked at the authentication anomalies?" "We have. It's on our list, but frankly, we're focused on more immediate concerns like your cloud security configuration and password policy enforcement." Amara felt a surge of frustration. "Those are important, but they're also the security equivalent of checking that the doors are locked while ignoring a tunnel being dug under the foundation." Davenport raised an eyebrow. "Colorful analogy, but accurate. The vulnerability I've identified could allow access to the entire customer database through a very specific exploit. It's not theoretical. I've demonstrated it in a controlled environment." "I'll have my team take another look," Davenport said, in a tone that suggested he was merely humoring her. By the end of the week, the Davenport team presented their preliminary findings to the executive team. Amara sat in the back of the conference room, listening as they outlined a comprehensive but conventional security enhancement plan. Her vulnerability was mentioned as a potential concern to be addressed in Phase 3, at least 6 months away. When the presentation ended, Amara approached Edward Chen. "The authentication vulnerability should be prioritized," she said quietly. "It poses an immediate risk." The CTO sighed. "Amara, we've hired the best security consultants in the business. If they don't consider this a high priority, they're wrong," she interrupted, then immediately regretted her bluntness. "I mean, they may not fully understand the specific architecture of our systems." Edward's expression hardened. "I think we're done here." Later that day, Marcus found her in the break room. "That didn't go well." "I know," Amara admitted. "I was too direct." "The thing is," Marcus said carefully, "you might be right, but this isn't just about being right. It's about working within the system, even when the system is flawed." "Especially then," Marcus replied. "Change happens from the inside incrementally." Amara considered his words. "So what do you suggest? Document everything, build alliances, pick your battles." He gave her a sympathetic look. "And maybe, just for a while, focus on some less controversial projects." For the next few weeks, Amara did exactly that. She threw herself into routine security tasks, collaborated with other teams, and built relationships across the company. But she also continued monitoring the authentication anomalies, watching as they became more frequent and consistent, a pattern that increasingly concerned her. She compiled her findings in a comprehensive report and submitted it through official channels, copying Marcus and, against her better judgment, Christine. This time she carefully framed the issue in corporate terms: potential regulatory violations, liability concerns, and reputation management. 3 days later, Christine stopped by her desk. "Your latest report is concerning." Amara looked up, surprised by the admission. "You've reviewed it," Christine nodded. "The pattern has evolved. I'm not entirely convinced it's as severe as you suggest, but it warrants investigation before the scheduled review." It wasn't full validation, but it was progress. "Thank you, Christine." "Don't thank me yet. I've requested an emergency assessment meeting, but with the quarterly earnings report next week, it may be delayed." The meeting was scheduled, then rescheduled, then postponed indefinitely as Vertex prepared for a major product launch. Amara's warnings once again disappeared into the bureaucratic void. 6 months after first identifying the vulnerability, Amara was working late, implementing security updates on the company's internal communication system. It was routine work but necessary, and it kept her mind off the larger unaddressed problems. Her phone buzzed with a company-wide emergency alert. "Critical system failure. All senior technical staff report immediately." Minutes later, she stood in the executive boardroom, watching as panic spread across the faces of Vertex's leadership team. The vulnerability she had warned about for months had been exploited. Hackers had accessed the customer database and were systematically extracting sensitive information. The room erupted in chaos, blame, panic, and desperate suggestions flew across the conference table. The legal team was already discussing disclosure requirements and potential liability. The marketing team was drafting crisis communications. The CTO was recommending a complete system shutdown. Through it all, Amara sat quietly, calculating, planning. She knew this system better than anyone in the room, knew exactly how the hackers had gained access and how they were maintaining it. When she finally stood and spoke, "I know how to fix this," the room fell silent. "You," Richard Harmon, the CEO, looked at Amara with confusion. Who are you exactly? Amara Collins, cybersecurity specialist, she replied evenly. I've been tracking this vulnerability for 6 months. I know how they got in and how to lock them out. Edward Chen, the CTO, frowned. This is hardly the time for I told you so, Ms. Collins. That's not why I'm speaking up, Amara said. We have 38 minutes before the breach becomes public. I can stop the data extraction and patch the vulnerability, but I need system-wide access and authorization to bypass standard protocols. The executives exchanged uneasy glances. How do we know your solution will work? Asked James Davenport, who had been called in for the emergency. Because I understand exactly how they're exploiting the authentication gap in the third-party verification service, Amara explained. It's creating microsecond windows where the system is exposed during credential handshakes. Richard looked to his CTO. Edward, your assessment. Edward hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. We did receive reports about potential vulnerabilities in that system. From Ms. Collins? Richard asked sharply. A tense silence filled the room. Yes, Edward finally admitted. Her concerns were scheduled for review in the next security assessment cycle. Richard's expression darkened. Which is now too late. He turned to Amara. What do you need? Administrative access to all systems, authorization to deploy emergency patches without standard testing protocols, and 2 engineers to assist with implementation. You have it, Richard said without hesitation. Edward, make it happen, now. The next 30 minutes were a blur of focused activity. Amara worked with almost mechanical precision, directing Devon and another engineer as they implemented her solution. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, writing custom code that would seal the breach without shutting down critical systems. Are we going to make it? Devon asked, his voice tense. Yes, Amara replied, not looking up from her screen, but it's going to be close. With 4 minutes remaining before the breach would become public, Amara deployed the final patch. The room held its collective breath as she ran a verification scan. It's done, she announced. The breach is contained. They extracted approximately 8% of the database before we locked them out, but the bleeding has stopped. Relief swept through the room. Richard approached her, his earlier skepticism replaced with something like respect. You saved this company from disaster, he said. But I have to ask, why didn't we address this vulnerability months ago? The question hung in the air. Amara could feel the weight of expectation, the opportunity to assign blame, to say, I told you so. The moment she had imagined countless times over the past 6 months. But standing there, she realized that moment looked different than she had anticipated. There were institutional barriers, she said carefully, and communication failures on multiple levels. Edward stepped forward. The failure was mine, he said. Ms. Collins identified this vulnerability months ago. Her reports were clear, detailed, and actionable. I prioritized other initiatives and scheduled her concerns for later review. Christine spoke up from across the room. I also dismissed her concerns initially. I was protective of the systems I helped build, too confident in our existing security measures. Richard surveyed the room. We'll conduct a full post-mortem tomorrow. For now, I want to know what happens next. Are we secure? The immediate vulnerability is patched, Amara explained. This was a sophisticated attack that exploited a specific weakness. We need a comprehensive security overhaul to ensure there aren't similar vulnerabilities elsewhere. And who should lead this overhaul? Richard asked. All eyes turned to Amara. With respect, James Davenport interjected, security remediation of this magnitude requires experienced leadership. Your team missed what Ms. Collins identified 6 months ago, Richard interrupted. He turned to Amara. You lead this initiative. Amara took a deep breath. This was more than vindication. It was an opportunity to create real change. But she also recognized the complexity of the situation and the importance of building bridges rather than burning them. I can, she said, but I'd like to propose a collaborative approach. A task force that includes internal expertise, people who know our systems intimately alongside external perspectives that can challenge our assumptions. Richard nodded slowly. Sounds sensible. Who would you include? Christine for her institutional knowledge, Devon for his technical expertise, Marcus to ensure we're aligned with broader IT initiatives. She paused. And yes, the Davenport team for their industry perspective and best practices. James Davenport looked surprised but nodded his acknowledgement. You're being remarkably generous to people who ignored your warnings, Richard observed. Amara met his gaze directly. This isn't about being right or wrong. It's about building better systems, both technical and human. We all made mistakes, myself included. I could have found more effective ways to communicate the urgency of the situation. Christine shook her head. No, Amara, you did everything by the book. We just weren't listening. Then that's where we start, Amara said. By listening to each other, by creating processes that value substance over status, by building a culture where good ideas are heard regardless of who presents them. Richard studied her for a long moment. You're talking about more than just technical systems. Yes, Amara acknowledged, because they're interconnected. The same institutional barriers that prevented my security warnings from being heard also create blind spots in how we develop products, serve customers, and build teams. The CEO glanced around the room, taking in the faces of his executive team. I think we've just had a very expensive lesson in the cost of those blind spots. He turned back to Amara. Ms. Collins, I'd like you to present your complete security remediation plan to the board tomorrow, and I'd also like your thoughts on how we might address those other systemic issues you mentioned. I'd be happy to, Amara replied. As the meeting adjourned, executives filed out, many stopping to introduce themselves to Amara, people who had passed her in hallways for months without a glance, now eager to connect. Marcus approached with a smile. Looks like you're going to get that seat at the table after all. Maybe, Amara said, but what matters is what I do with it. Devon gave her a fist bump as he passed. That was epic. The look on Davenport's face when you deployed that patch, priceless. Christine was the last to approach. I owe you an apology, she said quietly. I was wrong about your assessment, and I was wrong about you. We all have blind spots, Amara replied. The important thing is recognizing them. Christine nodded thoughtfully. For what it's worth, I think Richard is serious about change. You've opened a door that was closed to many of us for a long time. Then let's make sure it stays open, Amara said. Not just for me, but for everyone with valuable perspectives to contribute. As Amara gathered her things to leave, Richard Harmon reappeared in the doorway. Ms. Collins, he called. One more question before you go. She looked up. Yes. Why did you stay? After being ignored for months, most people would have left for a company that valued their expertise. Amara considered the question carefully. I believed in the work we're doing here, and I believed that eventually the truth would matter more than hierarchy. Richard nodded slowly. I'm glad you stayed, but I'm sorry it took a crisis for us to listen. The real test, Amara replied, will be whether we're still listening when the crisis has passed. The next morning, Amara arrived early to prepare for her presentation to the board. As she walked through the office, she noticed people looking at her differently, with respect, curiosity, perhaps even a bit of awe. Devon was already at his desk, dark circles under his eyes suggesting he'd been there all night. I've been reviewing the attack pattern, he said without preamble. It was even more sophisticated than we initially thought. They specifically targeted the vulnerability you identified, but they had backup entry points ready. Show me, Amara said, pulling up a chair. Together, they spent the next hour analyzing the attack methodology, identifying additional security concerns that would need to be addressed in her presentation. You know, Devon said as they worked, I always thought you were right about the vulnerability. I just didn't think anyone would listen until it was too late. That's the thing about systems, Amara replied. They resist change until they're forced to adapt. The trick is finding the leverage points that create meaningful transformation rather than just temporary fixes. At 9 o'clock, Amara stood before the Vertex Board of Directors, 12 people who collectively represented billions in investment capital and decades of industry experience. Only 2 were women, none were black. Yesterday, Vertex experienced a significant security breach, she began. Thanks to quick action, we contained the damage, but this incident exposed critical vulnerabilities, both in our technical infrastructure and in our organizational culture. For the next hour, she walked them through her analysis. The technical vulnerabilities that had been exploited, the systemic failures that had allowed warnings to go unheeded, and her comprehensive plan for addressing both. The technical solutions are straightforward, she explained. We patch the immediate vulnerabilities, implement enhanced monitoring, and conduct a comprehensive security review of all systems, but the organizational challenges are more complex. She paused, aware that she was venturing into territory beyond her official role. But the board members were listening intently, so she continued. Vertex has created a culture where information flows primarily through hierarchical channels. Ideas are evaluated based on who presents them rather than their merit. Warnings are filtered through layers of management, each with their own priorities and biases. Richard Harmon nodded slowly. And your proposed solution? A fundamental shift in how we evaluate ideas and manage risk, Amara said. Establishing direct communication channels for critical security concerns, creating diverse review teams that include perspectives from different levels and backgrounds. implementing anonymous reporting systems for employees who identify potential issues. One board member, an older man with a skeptical expression, leaned forward. That sounds disruptive to established management structures. It is, Amara acknowledged. But yesterday proved that our established structures failed to protect us from a preventable crisis. Sometimes disruption is necessary for growth. Another board member spoke up, one of the two women. Ms. Collins, you've presented a compelling case for change, but change of this magnitude requires leadership. Are you volunteering for that role? Amara took a deep breath. I'm volunteering to be part of it, but meaningful change can't depend on any single person. It requires commitment at every level, from the board to entry-level employees. Richard exchanged glances with several board members before speaking. We'd like to create a new position, Chief Information Security Officer, reporting directly to me, with expanded authority over both technical security and the organizational processes that support it. He looked directly at Amara. I'd like you to consider taking on that role. The offer was unexpected. Amara had hoped for more influence, perhaps a senior manager position, but this was a C-suite role, a seat at the highest table. I appreciate the offer, she said carefully. But I'd want to be clear about the mandate. Real change requires more than new titles. It needs resource commitment, executive buy-in, and measurable accountability. All of which you'd have, Richard assured her. Yesterday was a wake-up call, Ms. Collins, not just about our security vulnerabilities, but about the voices we've been ignoring. After the meeting, Amara found herself in Richard's office, discussing details of the new role. The conversation was interrupted when Marcus appeared in the doorway. Sorry to interrupt, he said, but there's something you both need to see. He handed Richard a tablet displaying a technology news site. The headline read, Vertex Technologies narrowly avoids data disaster, anonymous sources credit overlooked security expert. Richard frowned. Who spoke to the press? That's not important right now, Marcus said. What matters is the narrative forming in the industry. This could damage Vertex's reputation, or it could become a story of positive transformation. Depends on what happens next. Richard looked at Amara. It seems your impact is already extending beyond our walls. I didn't speak to any reporters, she clarified. I know, Richard said, but your story of identifying a critical vulnerability, being ignored for months, then saving the company when that vulnerability was exploited, it's spreading through the tech community. And it's raising uncomfortable questions about how companies like Vertex evaluate expertise and manage talent. Amara considered this. Then let's answer those questions honestly. Not with PR spin, but with real change that others can learn from. Over the following weeks, Amara led Vertex through a comprehensive security overhaul. But beyond the technical changes, she initiated a broader transformation in how the company operated. She established cross-functional security review teams that included members from different departments, levels, and backgrounds. She implemented anonymous reporting channels for potential vulnerabilities. She created mentorship programs that paired senior leaders with employees they might not typically interact with. Not everyone embraced these changes. Some managers resisted what they saw as challenges to their authority. Some executives questioned the resources dedicated to initiatives they viewed as cultural rather than technical. But Richard remained committed, backing Amara even when the path forward was contentious. 3 months after the breach, Vertex hosted a technology conference focused on security and organizational resilience. Amara was the keynote speaker. The most dangerous vulnerabilities in any organization aren't technical, they're human, she told the audience of industry leaders. They're the blind spots created when we only listen to voices that sound like our own. They're the institutional barriers that filter out critical information because it comes from unexpected sources. From the back of the room, she could see Richard nodding. In the front row sat Christine, Devon, and Marcus, her original allies who had become her leadership team. At Vertex, we're building systems that value substance over status, that elevate ideas based on merit rather than messenger. It isn't easy and we don't always get it right, but we're committed to the journey. After her speech, James Davenport approached her. You've created quite a transformation at Vertex, he said. My firm has been studying your approach. We're incorporating some of your methods into our security assessments now. Amara smiled. The best security isn't just about technology. It's about creating environments where truth can surface, where people feel safe pointing out the Emperor's new clothes. Later that evening, Amara found herself alone with Richard, reflecting on the journey of the past few months. When you stood up in that boardroom during the crisis, he said, what gave you the courage? After being ignored for so long, many people would have stayed silent, maybe even taken some satisfaction in seeing their warnings proven right. Amara considered the question. I wasn't thinking about being right or wrong in that moment. I was thinking about the millions of customers who trusted us with their data, the thousands of employees whose livelihoods depended on Vertex surviving. Some things are bigger than personal vindication. Richard nodded thoughtfully. You know, we're still not where we need to be. Our executive team and board don't reflect the diversity of our customers or our workforce. Our processes still favor confidence over competence too often. True, Amara acknowledged. But we're having the conversations now. We're asking the questions that matter. Change takes time, but the direction is what counts. And what about you? Richard asked. You've become something of an icon in the industry. I've heard other companies are trying to recruit you. Amara smiled. I've had offers, but I'm not finished here yet. The work we're doing at Vertex isn't just about one company. It's about creating a model that others can learn from. About showing that diversity of thought isn't just a moral imperative. It's a competitive advantage. As they walked toward the exit, they passed a conference room where a group of new employees were participating in a security training session led by Devon. Through the glass, Amara could see faces of different ages, genders, and ethnicities, a stark contrast to the homogeneous teams she'd encountered when she first arrived. That's what progress looks like, she said, nodding toward the room. Not just diversity in who we hire, but in whose ideas get heard, whose concerns are taken seriously. Richard followed her gaze. You know, when I became CEO, I thought my job was about making the big decisions. Now I'm realizing it's more about creating environments where the right decisions can emerge from anywhere in the organization. That's the real lesson from the breach, Amara agreed. Real security, comes from creating systems where the truth can rise to the surface, no matter who speaks it. As they reached the lobby, Amara's phone buzzed with a notification. It was a message from a young security analyst who had recently joined her team, identifying a potential vulnerability in a new product feature scheduled for release the following week. Duty calls? Richard asked, noticing her expression. Amara nodded. A potential security concern with the new release. Serious. I don't know yet, but the fact that a junior analyst felt comfortable flagging it directly to me, that's how I know we're making progress, she smiled. The system is working exactly as it should. If you found this story impactful, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support allows us to continue creating meaningful narratives that challenge assumptions and inspire growth. What moments in your career have you felt unheard or overlooked? How did you navigate those situations? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might help someone else find their voice. Remember, the most powerful changes often begin with a single person willing to speak truth, even when it's difficult. Be that person in your organization and watch how the ripples of your courage transform the entire system.